Buongiorno, bonjour, good morning, ministers, religious authorities, scholars, members of the European Parliament, Rector Ubertini, my dear former colleague Commissioner Jan Figel, my dear friend Stefano Manservisi, ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, it's really a great honor and great pleasure to be part of the kick-off meeting of the European Academy of Religion. And I'd like to start by thanking particularly the Honorable Valerio Onida and Professor Meloni for their kind invitation, but more importantly, for their initiative and hard work to make this day and this new academy a reality. As a member of the College of Commissioners, I also wanted to mention how happy I was and honored I was yesterday to meet for the first time the distinguished former President Romano Prodi. Romano Prodi is an eminent politician and European that gave so much and gives so much to his native Italy, but so much more to the European ideal. And allow me also a special reference for my dear friend Stefania Giannini, Minister Giannini. She's not able to be here today, but Stefania is one of the global leaders in science policy, and I've learned a lot with her. So, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, the dialogue among religions is more important than ever. It's more important than ever to understand and study religions. And that's why the launch of this new academy is particularly welcome. And of course, it builds on many existing studies and networks, and we also welcome the activities of other existing and successful scholarly endeavors and associations that every day promote this much-needed dialogue and research on religions. It is the right time to devote more attention and more importance to this area and to foster diversity of the approaches and the perspectives. We're living one of the most difficult moments in Europe, and I'm sure that we will overcome this moment. But no doubt that is a difficult moment, marked by security concerns, by economic uncertainty, by the refugee crisis. And every day when I get up, I think back to March the 22nd, when I was there sitting at my desk and started hearing scattered sounds of sirens and that were getting louder and louder every minute. And I looked out at the window and could see the smoke coming out of a building across the Commission headquarters in Brussels. I was watching, of course, the fallout of the second bomb that exploded that day at the Malabak metro station, on a day that would claim the life of 32 innocent people. One of them was Patricia Rizzo, an Italian that worked in one of the agencies that I oversee as a Commissioner for Science and Innovation. And Patricia encapsulated a true European story, coming from an Italian family that immigrated to various places. Today, scattered all over Europe, she worked for the European ideal, side by side with colleagues of 28 different nationalities, in an agency called the European Research Council, an agency that pushes the frontiers of science and knowledge. And that horrible day in March, I was yet another reminded of the need to work harder and harder every day for the European ideals of peace and prosperity. So I think that we really confronted in Europe to three great threats: the threat of extremism, the threat of populism, and the threat of protectionism. Extremism fuels fear, and fear fuels populism, and populism fuels protectionism and nationalism, which are the wrong-headed reactions to fear. President Mitterrand, in his last speech, he said, "Le nationalisme, c'est la guerre." And it is. That's why, and Francesco Bertini reminded about what's my objective as a Commissioner for Science and Innovation, is about an open innovation, an open science, and an openness to the world. Because each time we've closed ourselves in our countries, our people paid for it with more protectionism, with less economy, with war. And that's why we have to work hard for the security of our citizens, but also against the politics of fear and populism that dominates so much our current debate. So for me, dialogue and understanding are the right responses to these great threats. They are essential more than ever. Marie Skłodowska-Curie used to say that there's nothing to be feared, only to be understood. Understanding religions is therefore an essential task. And for that to happen, we just need more dialogue, more interdisciplinarity, more cross-fertilization, and to understand the links between religion and science and the history of religions. That is, after all, the history of all of us, the history of humanity. It is the shared history of how we develop our culture, our outlook. How do we deal with the unknown? How do we develop our rules of social interaction and our ethics? You know, sometimes I get myself thinking about religion, about understanding. And somehow understanding religion is looking in what has divided humanity, oftentimes to the point of war. But more important, at what has united humanity. A recent history of the Euro-Asian world, the Silk Roads, by a great writer called Peter Frankopan, is excellent in showing the commonalities of the three religions of the book. How that meant substantive common knowledge and considerable tolerance in the early days of Islam. Understanding religion is also about acknowledging the interesting and fascinating links between science and religion, and encouraging a deeper dialogue between science and religion. And we all know the famous cases of clash between science and religion, but also the cases in which religion was a source of inspiration and the drive of scientific discovery. That dynamics between science and religion are still critical today. And politically, we're living in what some people call a post-fact world. And in this context of this idea that you can say everything you want, it's crucial to highlight the strength of science by stressing what science is, but more importantly, what it is not. John Gray, the philosopher, following the footsteps of Karl Popper, has been criticizing for a long time what he describes as scientism. And I quote, "The modern belief that scientific inquiry can enable us to resolve conflicts and dilemmas in contexts where traditional sources of wisdom and practical knowledge seem to have failed." And he goes on, and I quote, "Scientism has three defining problems. Large and highly speculative hypotheses are advanced to explain developments that are extremely complex and highly contingent in nature. The second problem of scientism is that fact and value are systematically confused. And third is that attractively simple theories that result are invested with power of overcoming moral and politic difficulties that have so far proved intractable. End of quote. And you know, I don't see this criticism of John Gray as a rejection of the importance of science. On the contrary, I see it rather as a warning that science and scientists cannot be arrogant, that they have to be more vocal and pedagogical about the merits and strengths of the scientific method and the importance of skepticism. People are tired of numbers, people are tired of facts. So if you're an expert or a scientist, it's not about telling people what to believe, it's about explaining them the method. It's about explaining the process, and it's about explaining that in between what you know and what you don't know, there's an inferential gap. And that's the only way, because if not, you disconnect from the people if you just tell them that you know everything. In the age of the digital world, you have to connect the people, explaining them what you do. What's your method? What's the process? So the scientists have to understand that science is one input for policy decision. But policy makers have to balance these against other factors, such as culture and values. And to me, this also means that science cannot and should not ignore the immense humanity contained in the history and manifestations of religions, and that the history of religions cannot likewise ignore the importance of productive value of the scientific method and scientific rigor. So in this complex world we live in, knowledge can only truly advance with an open mind, with a spirit of collaboration, including strong emphasis on interdisciplinarity. And if there's one message, just one message that I wanted to leave with you as we start this new endeavor, is about the importance of cross-fertilization and multidisciplinarity. And how important is it to actually look broadly and widely for insights and for new perspectives. Today, you can only have a true understanding through dialogue and collaboration among different perspectives. And to illustrate this point, really, let me just go through what I call a tantalizing prospect that was recently proposed by Professor Alison Gopnik. Many scholars had pointed out that parts of the thought of David Hume, for many, one of the most important philosophers in the modern age, were similar to some parts of the Buddhist thought. And if you look at Hume in his book one of the Treatise, he has this idea that an enduring discoverable self was nothing less than a chimera, which is somehow very Buddhist, a very Buddhist idea. And introspection relieved, and I quote, that nothing but a bundle or collection of different perceptions which succeed each other with an inconceivable rapidity and are in a perpetual flux and movement, end of quote. Scholars that had noticed this similarity in between David Hume and Buddhism dismissed that similarity. They said it was a mere coincidence. After all, at the time of Hume, there were no available texts on Buddhism in Western Europe. But Professor Gopnik found out a possible way in which Hume could have become acquainted with Buddhism. And if confirmed, this fact should lead to a fresh reappraisal of his thought. The link is a man called Charles-François Delu, a Jesuit missionary who taught in the Collège Royal de la Flèche in between 1723 and 1714. Delu was an interesting man that retired to La Flèche after several years traveling in Asia, where he was exposed to the Theravada Buddhism in Siam. And Gopnik found out that David Hume stayed in this college at the time when Delu was already there. And her hypothesis, very difficult to prove indeed, is that Delu told David Hume about his first-hand exposure with Buddhist thought. If they indeed had discussions about Buddhism, this could have served as a direct influence to Hume's thought. And this would explain the similarities between this philosophical outlook and Buddhism. This is indeed a fascinating hypothesis. Think about it in the perspective of dialogue, of cross-fertilization, of interdisciplinarity. Alison Gopnik is a professor of psychology, but she teaches in the philosophy department of Berkeley. And what she did was amazing. She used her knowledge of philosophy and then applied methods of historical research to present an hypothesis that links one of the largest Eastern religions to one of the most important Western thinkers. And that link was a Jesuit missionary. You have in this story the importance of dialogue. Literally, if you think about it, if Hume and Delu stroll the gardens of La Flèche talking about religion, you have an important dialogue between religion and philosophy. And you have the importance of approaching the history of religions from broad and wide perspectives. So, ladies and gentlemen, I am confident that the now launched Academy of Religions will be a major contribution to these urgent and fertile dialogues. And that with this endeavor, you will approach religions from this perspective of dialogue and collaboration towards a better understanding. So I look forward to your contributions. I wish you all the best. And I said at the beginning, Europe needs to understand more to fear less. Science, dialogue, and collaboration have to be the engines of that understanding. Thank you very much.